Alrighty. Well, we'll see if this all works. Yeah, I'm super excited. Wow, you guys are a long ways away. All right, that's okay. That's okay. I'm not gonna get any interaction, right? Like in the, hey, if you want to come up, I would love it. I would love it if you guys were a little bit closer, and ladies. But incentive. Oh, that's a good question. Not really. Just more of a chance that I might spit on you. That's so. Yeah. There's only downside, unfortunately. Thank you for being brave. I appreciate that. Yeah, leadership is specifically in the field of IT is my favorite thing. It's something I've been focused on and passionate about for upwards of 25 years. And so one of the things that I thought would be really fun is to kind of go through a process here, a presentation that is as much an opportunity for you to identify whether or not you are called to leadership. And I'll talk a little bit about what I think that means so that there's no confusion. But the format of this will be that I will have a part of the presentation where there'll be slide after slide of really questions where I'll kind of ask the question, pose the question of you, and talk a little bit in more detail about why that's important. And I want to pose it in a way that allows you to say, yes, that's me, or yes, that's something that feeds my soul, and that I think I gain energy from if I do that on a regular basis, or no, that sucks the life out of my soul and I hate it, right? And the more yeses that you give to those, there'll be 8 of those slides altogether. And I'd say if you give 5 or more yeses to those, you might be called to leadership. So that's the format of the session. I hope it's helpful to you. My name is Tim, and I started my career long time ago in the United States Air Force right out of high school. I had no desire to go to college out of high school, and I wanted to go out and do real things. And so I joined the Air Force before I even started my senior year in high school. And I was fortunate enough to get one of my top choices for jobs, and that was computer systems operations. And so I worked on what they would call a mid-range computer, a Unisys or Sperry level computer, very much like an IBM AS400, that sort of class of computer. And those were the computers in a computer center that I was working on between 1990 and 94. So now you know exactly how old I am. As I got out of high school, I did that for 4 years, and I moved into working for a school district, which was super ironic because I hated school personally in high school. It was right, I didn't want to go to college out of high school, but I found a job through a friend working as a computer systems technician and then ultimately a software developer. What I really wanted to do was become a software developer for a large company. But working at the school district, they were very kind to my college schedule. So as I went back to college to get my computer science degree, to be able to do what I really wanted to do, I was able to get a fairly decent paying job as a software developer at doing what I was studying to do at a school district. And funnily enough, I just stayed with schools. And I'll talk a little bit about how that happened in a minute, but I ended up being a chief technology officer for about 13 years in 3 different school districts in California. The last school district I worked at was Fairfield-Sassoon Unified School District in the Bay Area of California, pretty large school district, about the same size as Springfield Public Schools. And I was the chief technology officer there, had a department of 42 IT people, and went one-to-one and had devices for every student, and big time networking operation, wireless networking, and a lot of stuff going on there. Ultimately, I ended my career in schools for 4 years as a chief communications officer, and I was a lucky person to be a chief communications officer during COVID in the Bay Area, California, in a big school district. It was ugly and weird, and but I learned a lot through that time. And ultimately, what I learned was that I needed to move out of California. And so about 3 years ago, left that career behind, moved to Branson, Missouri, and started an IT consulting and leadership business where I really focus on helping IT people make the transition from IT professional to IT leader. It's a very difficult and challenging transition for most. And I love being in the middle of that and helping people decide, find out whether or not they're called to leadership and how to make that transition. So that's me in a general nutshell. And the problem that I'm trying to solve in my business and how it relates to this presentation is that I really want to see the right people in the IT leadership seats. And what I find often, I'm brought in with companies to do consulting, to do reorganizations of large organizations, IT organizations, or work with IT leaders who are really having some challenges, usually people challenges. And I'll come alongside them and really help them, work out what are their strengths. Are they called to leadership? What are their challenges? How do we help them be successful and therefore the department be successful? And what I see in my practice over and over and over again is so many of the people in IT and technology leadership are really, really not meant to be in that seat. And they think that it's the natural progression of their career, right? And so they make that transition and they want more money and more responsibility, and that makes sense. And so they move into management, and then they just hate life. They're miserable. They make everybody around them miserable. And the department doesn't work well, and it shows. But then they have a difficult time trying to figure out how they get out of that. And so what I try to do is figure out how do we get the right people in those seats in the first place. And that's what this presentation is really about. But also, we speed up the acquisition of skills, of leadership skills. For me, I knew I was called to leadership. It was a passion of mine. I wanted to work with people and help them grow and help them become leaders in the IT field. But as I made the transition into management, I can tell you it really took me about 8 years before I got to the point where I knew I was doing it well. And 8 years is far too long for that kind of a transition. In the meanwhile, I had people that I was leading who were suffering because I was trying to figure it out, right? And so I've written a curriculum that really is designed for IT professionals making the transition and getting them to make that transition in less than a year, if possible, 3 months. That's sort of the goal of what I try to do, is to do that fast. And the purpose is to create better lives for the people in IT because I care about them. And also, if they're doing things well and things are better for them, then the outcomes for their organizations are better as well. So one of the funny things that I found out over my career, and I found this out as the CTO for Fairfield Sassoon Unified, was that technology people who solve problems then take extra time to teach clients how to avoid the problem in the future aren't getting promoted by management as a rule, but they should be. And the reason for that is because a lot of the metrics that we use show those kinds of IT people as people who are actually, the metrics we use often say that they're middling people. They're not our best IT professionals. Our best usually are the ones who get things done very quickly, right? And check off the lists and show good control of the systems that they're responsible for. Those are the people we typically consider as our best IT professionals. And those are the people who usually get promoted into leadership. But interestingly enough, it's the people who are slower usually because they're spending extra time working with the people that they're helping to avoid the problems in the future and help them better master the technology. Those are the people who usually are more suited to leadership roles and take it on better and do a better job. And so when we found that out, one of the things that we realized was, I think I was actually having a meeting, a one-on-one with an employee who was in that sphere. He was right in the middle, right? And I was just pointing out some of the data from the help desk ticket system and saying, you know, you're in the middle. I wasn't criticizing him or anything like that, but I just showing him the data, you know, and asking him what he thought about that, how he thought he might improve in the area of speed. And he was the one who said, well, if I might, I think there's a good explanation for why I'm not as fast as some of the others in the department. And I said, okay, tell me more. And that's what he said was, I take extra time to help the people that I work with master the technology so that they have less problems in the first place. And then he pointed out, you'll notice that my site, he was in charge of a particular school, you'll notice that my site actually has less tickets than many of the other sites in the first place. And that's because my people that I work with are better at using the technology. And so a lot of those tickets that come in because the user's not using the technology well, it's not because the technology is broken, those are lessened at my site because of the actions that I take. And that like flipped me around and maybe said, you know, let's talk about how we measure that, because I want more of that in my department. And so that was when we came up with a system that was really a two-tiered system where speed of support was matched and evenly distributed with data that we would get on satisfaction, customer satisfaction of support and experience. And so that person really helped me get a sense of that. And then I started realizing that person ended up being a premier IT leader. We ended up promoting him, and he ended up being phenomenal in that role. And I made the connection. It was like, wait a second. So then we started digging in deeper and really finding what are the other sort of cues? What are the things that we can, how do we identify people in the IT professional position that are made and called for leadership? How do we identify those people and make sure that they get the training and the mentorship that they need to get fast-tracked into those positions, because clearly there's some tie there. So I do want to identify, and this will be helpful, I think, for you in the rest of the presentation as we ask these questions that I'm about to ask of you, is what is great leadership? And I like to make things as simple as possible. If I can, you know, look at sort of a hierarchy of all of the things that say great leadership, if there are two things I can boil them down to where they're all sort of subsets of these two things, it's about inspiration and accountability, right? Which interestingly enough, to me, when I first realized that, they seem like sort of divergent things, right? That it's difficult to have an accountability conversation with an employee and have that also be inspiring, right? Right? Like that's the, you know, you're in the office with the principal, kind of you're in trouble if you're having that accountability conversation, and that's not very inspiring. And so I always, when I first really realized that, I thought, you know, so does that mean I'm doing a bunch of actions that look like accountability and a bunch of separate actions that look like inspiration? But as I really thought about it and as I practiced over time, I realized, yeah, it does mean that in some ways, but there are a set of actions, 8 or 9 major ones, that really do both at the same time. And those are sort of the super actions of a great leader. If you're doing those things on a regular basis, if you're creating both of these situations with one act, that's the most efficient way to get to great leadership. So what's a good example of an act that both promotes accountability and inspires people at the same time? I'd say the biggest thing, and this is probably the biggest challenge that I give to leaders that I work with in a coaching capacity, is when a leader makes themselves accountable to the people who they lead, that is probably the biggest super leadership act that you can do. So if you think about it, if you're working with a boss who comes to you and says, I realize that the person above me, who, say if they're the IT leader in the organization, the person who is supervising them is probably a business leader or the CEO. They probably don't know much about IT. Most IT leaders are in that kind of a situation, right? It's difficult for that person to really keep them accountable. But who knows whether or not an IT leader is doing a good job as an IT leader? The people that they're trying to lead are in the best position to evaluate that. So when a leader says, I'm going to create an evaluation process where my people evaluate me on a regular basis, and then I take the feedback from them and actually improve based on the things they tell me I could do better, is that not probably the most inspiring thing a leader could do in an IT department? And when they keep themselves accountable, they promote the idea of everybody being accountable in the department, right? So that's sort of an example of one thing you can do as a leader that promotes both of these things at the same time. There are others. And you'll get shades of that in the rest of this presentation. So this is the first one. This is the first question that I have for you. If you're trying to evaluate whether or not you're called to leadership, whether or not you're right for a people leadership role in technology, the question is, do you have a vision? Is it a vision that you're passionate about and willing to sacrifice for? So there's a lot of people who do a great job of their job, software development, IT support, whatever it is, and they don't actually have a vision. They just come every day and they do the work, and they're satisfied with that. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. I've known many, many people who do phenomenal jobs, but they've never given a lot of thought to whether or not what they're doing every day feeds into some bigger thing that is important to a bunch of other people, and that they're doing good in the world, right? By doing this, by pursuing this vision. A lot of people just don't think about it. But as a leader, you have to, right? This has to be sort of the central thing that drives you, is this vision. So if you're not in a leadership position, but you do have a vision, a lot of times the people that I know that are in this position, there's a little bit of tension, because usually they have a vision and they're pretty strong on that vision, and sometimes they think their bosses are screwing up a lot. And so they'll have a little tension with their bosses because they feel like they could do a better job, right? Sometimes those people get passed by for promotions because the boss is threatened by them, right? But it's those people who should be more considered for the leadership roles, right? And so, but they have to be willing to sacrifice for the vision. And why is that important? Because it's the vision that you allow people to keep you accountable to as a leader. And it's a vision that you can get everybody keeping each other accountable to. It's hard to get a bunch of people and keep them accountable to what you want as a leader, because they may not want it, right? But if you establish a vision that everybody that you're leading is excited about, and they all agree to pursue that vision, now you can stand off to the side as a leader and say, we are all pursuing this vision together. You get to keep me accountable to whether or not I'm pursuing this vision well. Everybody gets to keep everybody accountable to whether or not we're pursuing that vision well. And then when we do that accountability action, it tends to be more inspiring than frustrating, right? If it's about the vision. So the vision is, to me, is the most important thing. If you have a vision, when you're not in a leadership position, you're more likely to have a vision drive you when you are, and that's extremely important. And then finally, I did want to just say too, you have to be able to be willing to talk about it all the time. So if it sounds like it would suck the life out of you to say the same thing basically over and over and over again every day, that's how you drive home the vision as a leader. And I struggled with that because I always felt like it was a sign of respect to people to tell them once and then leave them alone. Anything, right? Like if I didn't like to hammer home the same thing over and over again and repeat myself, because to me it felt like I was telling people that they were dumb for not, you heard me the first time, I don't need to say it again. But the reality is, when it comes to vision, you have to be able to say it over and over and over again, what it is that we're pursuing. And you have to not, even if you get tired of it, you have to be willing to keep doing it, because people do need that. So the second thing is, do you enjoy leveraging tech to solve business problems, or is solving tech problems enough to drive your satisfaction? Now, I imagine most of the people in the room are software developers, so this is probably an easy one for most of you, because most of the software developers usually nail this, because they're developing software usually for a business case, not just for tech's sake, right? And so software developers are usually used to this. A lot of IT support people struggle with this. They come and they fix the server because the server needs to be fixed, right? It's just about keeping things up and running. But they don't think a lot about, what is the business use case? What am I improving in the overall business, and how does what I'm doing tie to the business? As a leader, not only do you have to think about that, but you have to do everything from the perspective of business is greater than tech. Tech is a tool to utilize for the betterment of the overall business. So you have to know something about the business, really become a student of the business that you're working in, and be all about leveraging the tech for the business case. And a lot of people struggle with that. And that is different depending on what organization you're in. When I was in school districts, it was all about, I had to learn a lot about education and how that works. If you're in a banking organization, you got to learn a lot about banking and really tie everything you're doing to the betterment of the organization at large. So if that's something that drives you, you're into solving the bigger business problems and connecting your work, that's a yes, that's a good thing. From a standpoint of being called to leadership. All right. Are you an avid reader? This is number 3. So yes or no. Are you an avid reader? When I say avid reader, doesn't have to necessarily be all reading. You can substitute listening. Audible is fair. Listening to podcasts works. The point of this is, great leaders are taking in information, varying information all the time. Not just about stuff in their slice of work, but all kinds of stuff. And the purpose of that is to be able to help your mind make connections between disparate things. So the best leaders can see something and go, oh, that's like this over here. And when they are able to compare the two disparate things and see how they're alike and how they're different, they're able to come up with new and innovative ideas that will help run their group. So it's really, really important. The best leaders from a research perspective are consuming 24 books a year. That's a pretty high bar. right? So if reading 24 books a year sounds like, oh God, kill me now, you'd probably want to put a no on this one, right? But if reading 24 books or listening to 24 books a year is like, yeah, I could do that. And not only could I do that, but I think I would enjoy getting the different opinions and ideas from that, and that would help me broaden my horizons, then you could probably put a yes here. All right, the fourth one. Now I'm going to warn you, the fourth and the fifth one are both start with can you control your emotions. So I'm going to actually have two that are like this, but they come from two different angles. The first angle is great leaders are able to provide difficult feedback without demeaning people or getting into useless arguments. Right? So it's not about them, it's about the best for the person that you're working with. You want them to be their best. Right? You want them to achieve their goals, and therefore you're enlightening them and saying, hey, this is something I'm seeing that might be something that is holding you back from your goals, right? When you can approach those types of conversations and control your emotions when the person comes back and defends themselves because they feel like they're being attacked by you, then you might be called to be a leader. If you can do that. If you really struggle with that and you'd rather have a back and forth with the person and try to win, and that's the way you want to operate, probably you have to say no to this one. And here's the second, control your emotions. Can you control your emotions in this way? Great leaders invite difficult feedback from those who don't have authority over them. I already kind of talked about this, right? And they thank those who provide it sincerely. This is hard, right? Like when you invite accountability from people who are not in authority over you, right? That's the hallmark of the greatest leaders, is that they want to learn and get better, and they go to whatever source can help them do that. And I can tell you, in the frame of technology, the best people that can help you do that are your people you're trying to lead as a leader. They just are. And so when that person then comes after they've been invited to give you feedback about how you're doing, and they give you something tough or challenging to chew on about what you're doing, I say what you have to be able to do is be in enough control over your emotions to thank them for doing it and thank them sincerely. Thank you for telling me that. I'm going to think about that. Can you give me more ideas of how I might not do that in the future, or how I might make sure that I'm avoiding this situation in the future? Give me more feedback. Tell me more. And being able to do that calmly, not defend yourself, and just get it. Because the thing you have to realize, and this is super hard. Don't get me wrong. This is super hard. Every person that I coach, almost every person I coach, has major difficulty with this. Major difficulty. Not being defensive when somebody tells them you suck in this area, right? You're not doing this well. Even if they invited it, right? It's like your tension goes immediately, right? But the thing I remind them is you're the leader. And therefore this person who's coming to you, who has no authority over you, is, number one, taking a major risk by telling you this. Like, you could squash them, right? There is a power dynamic going on here, and you are in charge. And likewise, you should not see them as a threat because you're in charge. They can't get you fired. Not really, right? Unless the whole crew mutinies against you. But if that happens, you're bad, right? So you probably deserve it. So, or you just shouldn't be working there. But so it's just recognizing and resting in your power and in your authority, and saying, this person, I can only gain good things by understanding this. And you can get feedback from somebody that you completely disagree with, right? They can say, you're doing this and it's terrible. And you can say in your mind, as the leader, I totally disagree with that. I think what I'm doing is actually really good. And you just don't like it because you don't like this, that, or the other thing, right? But don't say that. You have to control your emotions and say, thank you for telling me that. Because at the end of the day, even if you're not going to change your behavior because you think they're wrong, knowing that they think that about you is powerful information for you to have as a leader. So super important. So if you can control yourself and your emotions in this way, you get to say yes to that slide. All right, how interested are you in discovering other people's goals, desires, and strengths? Interested enough to make real structural moves to let them work toward those things? So the reason, and it's really the second question that's the operative question that you need to be able to say yes or no to. This is a tricky thing, right? Because on its surface, it's easy to say, yeah, I have a genuine interest in the people that I work with. Yeah, I want for them to get their goals and their desires, and I want for them to work in their strengths. You can want that all day long. But if you don't take action, or you aren't willing to do the work as a leader to get people in the right spots doing the right work, which actually is hard in a lot of organizations to do, then it doesn't mean anything. How you feel about them doesn't matter if you're not willing to recognize, oh, this person's in the wrong seat on the bus, right? They're in the wrong position. Their strengths lie over here. And we have projects over here, but if I take that person and I put them on this project, which would allow them to work within their strengths and within their desires and within the goals that they have for themselves, you might be ruffling feathers over here, right? Or you might be getting crosswise with human resources, right? Because now you're working this person out of the classification that they're hired into in order to do that over there. But really, doing that work, it's like the question is if the person's in the wrong seat, as a leader, the best thing you can do is get them in the right one and figure out how to do it. Because the longer they work in the wrong seat, the worse work they'll do. And that I can tell you over my 25-year career that almost nobody that I worked with who was performing badly needed to be fired. They just needed to be moved into the right position. And once I did the work to understand what their strengths were, what their goals were, where they desired to be in their career and in their lives, and then started moving them. I didn't have to give them the dream right off the bat. I just had to start moving them in that direction, given professional development they needed to move them in that direction. Let them work on this project for 5 hours a week that really is in their sweet spot, and then move them in that direction. When they get the opportunity to apply for a job outside of the organization that really is in their sweet spot, support that. Write the letters of recommendation, be the reference, talk them up, get them into that position. So it's more than just being interested in people's desires and their goals and their strengths. You have to be willing to do the structural work, which is not easy work, to get them where they need to be. If you can say yes to this, that's another mark in the direction of your calling as a leader. So this one was really actually tough for me. I really struggled with this, especially early in my management career. Are you a complimenter? And I don't mean fake compliments, right? And I don't mean inconsequential compliments. Like for me to say, hey, you look nice today, that's not the kind of compliments I'm talking about. The powerful compliments are specific. They're about the effort that the person has put in on something that has had a good outcome. And the challenging part about it for me was noticing. Because I was so wrapped up in me every day, like I'm walking down the hall doing, thinking about what I'm doing next. And I'm not looking around to see what good things people are doing, right? Because you first have to notice in order to compliment properly. And a proper compliment is about the person's effort. Hey, Tim, I want to compliment you. You did an incredible thing today. This is what you did, specific. This is the outcome that it had. This is the impact it had on our team. That was awesome. And it has to be the truth. It can't be a fake. It can't be something you embellished or lied about or, white lied about or whatever to get the compliment, your compliment quota that day. That's where the struggle is, right? Once you realize how powerful this is, as a leader, you're like, okay, how do I make sure I'm doing these compliments more? The challenge is that you could get into doing hollow compliments. And hollow compliments are probably the worst thing that you could do, right? Because if a leader is giving you hollow compliments that you know aren't true, if I walk into an environment and I see a leader give a compliment to somebody and that person rolls their eyes, that's a hugely bad sign, right? That means the compliments that they've been giving for a long period of time are not honest. They're not real. That's not the truth. So this is hard work, putting together a system for yourself to notice and then recognize when people are doing good things that are true and that are about their effort and about the outcomes, and then become specific about it and then go deliver that compliment well. And to do that a lot is actually super hard work, but it's magical. If you do it right, it's magical for your department and for the people that you work with. So if this sounds like a soul-sucking situation, like, oh my God, I don't want to, you have to say no to this. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, right? Like, you don't have to be called to leadership. That's fine. But if this is something that you're like, yeah, I could do that, and I think that would be something that I would gain energy from, if doing that right on a regular basis, you might be called to be a leader. So this is the last one, and this one's a hard one for IT people, for technology people in general, right? Because a lot of, like I'd mentioned before, most of the people who get promoted into management positions are really good IT people. And that means they're usually better than their IT people, at least for a period of time after they get into management, at particular things. And so there's sort of a tendency for those new managers, those new leaders, to get into a routine of pushing their people aside and just saying, just let me do it. And that basically what you say as a leader when you do that to your people is, I don't trust you to do your job, right? And so you have to fight against this. You have to be willing to delegate, even though you know you can do it better. You have to let them do it. Give them the opportunity. Let them fumble through, and provide help along the way, but don't do it for them. And it's harder than you might think. So you have to be focused. The best way to do that is to be focused on the process rather than the outcome. Because if you know that you can do it better than somebody in your department and you're focused on the outcome, then it's going to be almost impossible to keep from getting too involved and not delegating properly. So you have to be focused on the process and be thinking about, what is the person going to gain by me allowing them to do this? And when they gain that knowledge, that skill, that ability, and that confidence, how is that going to impact all of us long term, right? So it creates readiness for them. It allows them to own the outcome of it, and then you want to own the outcome as well, even if the outcome is not that great, because they weren't as good as you were at doing that particular thing. You still have to own it and support that person and work with them to say, all right, let's figure out how you can do better in the next time, right? So are you a delegator? Have you shown yourself, even when you haven't been in a leadership position, to be able to trust others with sections of work and let them do it and let them be a team member? Or is your natural thing to kind of say, I'm the best at this particular thing, get out of the way, let me do this. It's a fine line. Again, there's nothing wrong with being awesome, right, at whatever it is you're doing. But if you want to be a great leader, you have to let go of your awesomeness in a lot of ways in order for other people to become awesome, right? That becomes the important aspect of the process. So what I want to encourage you to do today, and I hope this is short enough too that we can, if you have questions or anything, I'm happy to answer those. But I want to just encourage you, if you are thinking about leadership, thinking about moving into a position, or maybe you have recently, of people leadership, that regardless of whether or not you think you're going to absolutely nailed it, maybe you said yes on all 8 things today that I gave you. That does not mean you're going to nail it right off the bat. Okay? Nobody does. And so I would encourage you to look into getting a coach or a mentor, somebody who understands the environment within your which you work. The reason for that is you can get a leadership coach that's from another sector entirely, but that's going to be what I've found is that when you're trying to become a great leader, there are kind of 3 variables you have to address in that process. The first variable is you, your strengths, your personality, like the things that you do well and the things you don't do well. You have to know what those things are. You have to figure those things out so that you can capitalize on your strengths and then not shore up necessarily weaknesses, but help bring other people in who are strong in your weak areas and let them lead in those areas. That's kind of the best practice. So first you have to think about what's the you variable? Who are you? Because you're going to lead dynamically in a different way than somebody else will. The right answer for you is not the right answer for the person next to you. So that's variable number 1 in leadership. Variable number 2 is the environment within which you're leading. So if I'm leading an organization, a banking organization, again, as opposed to an educational organization, those environments are drastically different. And so there are going to be some variables around the environment that's going to require you to understand your environment well. And that's where it's helpful to have a coach who understands your environment so that they can remove that variable right away when you're working together. And then the third variable is the people that you're trying to lead, right? So the groups of people, both corporately and individually, they're all different, right? So you have to figure out who they are and what good leadership looks like for them, right? So those 3 variables you have to contend with as a leader. When you get a coach or a mentor who understands your role and who has been there before, that takes away kind of 2 of the variables right away. It makes it easier on 2 of those variables. And then you can really get to work on figuring out who you are as a leader and doing that. Also, all but one of the people that I'm coaching right now, their services are paid for by their company, their organization. So there's a total lack of professional development out there for leaders. I mean, it's just not a lot available, especially for IT or technology-related leaders. And so while you might have a bunch of professional development money set aside for your department as a technology leader, and it's really easy to say, well, this software developer is going to this training or doing this online thing, because that's the job that they're going to be working on. And it's very easy to define that. It's not so easy to define that for leaders, right? And so a lot of times leaders just spend all of their professional development money on their people, and then they don't leave anything for themselves, right? So I would just encourage that you don't have to pay for it yourself. Most companies, if you go to your boss as a new IT leader and you go, hey, I want to coach for a year to help guide me through this process of making the transition to leadership, I guarantee you it may sound like weakness, like you're admitting weakness to your boss, but I guarantee you 90% of the C-level people out there understand that as a sign of strength, that you are willing and want to have somebody come alongside you and help you through that transition. And a lot of times they won't tell you, but like 45% of Fortune 500 CEOs have coaches, and their companies pay for it, right? So they won't tell the people underneath them that they have coaches, right? But a lot of them do, right? So when you come and go, hey, I think this would be good for me, especially in my first year or two of doing this, you're going to get a lot of understanding. Most of the time, people are going to go, oh, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, let's do that. It is the best professional development, I think, for leaders is to have a mentor or a coach that's been there before. And so here's my contact info. I'm on LinkedIn. If you want to connect with me there, I'd love to connect with you. I'm sharing resources all the time on there for free. Happy to have conversations. This is my cell phone number. It's just out there, hopefully all you security people don't own me because I'm giving you all that information. But I'm here for you, and I want to be the person who you think of first when you're moving into that leadership position or having challenges in that role that I can come along and help you with. So hopefully that's helpful for you. I don't know if we have time for questions. All right, cool. Yeah, there it is.
How about that? Is that coming through? Yep. Okay. All right. Any questions?
Hey, Tim, what's up? First, my name's Morgan. Thank you so much for coming out and
You
presenting.
connected with me on LinkedIn today.
I did, yeah. I hit you up.
Thank you for that. That was awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for coming out and presenting. That was very helpful. I have two questions, but I'll ask my first question, and then I'll let other people ask first. But as a leader of leaders, what would you say, and you gave a list of a lot of tools that we can put in our tool belts, but as a leader of leaders, what would you say is the most important tool in your tool belt? Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
I think the most important tool in the tool belt is a great vision that other people can get excited about. I think everything emanates from that because if you have that great vision, I'll share with you what my vision was, and I fell into it, but it served me so well, and it made things so much easier. I mentioned I didn't like school, but I ended up working in schools for 25 years. Like, how ironic is that, right? But as I was working for schools as a software developer, I kind of caught a vision of like, I was working, I never felt like high school was relevant to me. So I'm getting some nods, right? Like, I went through classes, I got C's. Right, just did the minimum to get through, not get in too much trouble. But I spent most of my time outside of school tinkering with doing things that weren't offered at school. And so when I would go to class at school, I was like, this is pointless. I was always the one that was like sitting in the back of the classroom. How are we going to use this in the real world? Right, and the teachers kind of get irritated with me. Usually they would say the standard answer was, you have to learn this in order to be successful in college. And then I would go, what if I'm not going to go to college? Why would I want to go and pay to do more of this? Because this seems useless to me. And then they would get really mad at me, right? So that was kind of my sort of antagonistic high school sort of self. But when I started working as a software development in schools, I got the opportunity to work on a project called Virtual Enterprise. And Virtual Enterprise in California, at the time we were starting it as a new program, it was a 2-period high school class that allowed students to simulate a business, where the teacher was no longer the teacher was a facilitator, they were a consultant, and the students took on leadership roles in the company, in the fake company, and they created a website and a business plan, and they would do all these things that were fairly real world. And my job at the central office of all of that was to create a virtual banking system, a web-based virtual banking system in 1997, Internet Explorer based, Microsoft SQL Server on the back end, TSQL code, and ASP, right? And so I was creating this system that would allow students to do payroll in their fake businesses for all the students as if they were employees, and to be able to send funds from one class at a school to another class participating in the program. So we built this network of 250 schools in California, and it became this virtual economy, and they were all buying and selling virtual products from each other. And it was really this cool thing, and I got to be a part of developing the systems that supported that. And as I was doing that, that's when I sort of caught this vision of like, what if I could utilize technology and what I understand about technology in schools to create schools that I wish I had when I was in school, right? So that kind of became the vision, is bring relevance into the classroom, because we were getting the internet and technology that would allow the outside world to come in and students to be able to publish out to the outside world. So that became my vision, just sort of like I fell into that and thought, that might be cool. And then I had people around me encourage me to stay in education and do that. And then I became a director level position, technology, and that's what I was pursuing, was making that happen at the schools. Well, what I found was I was so passionate about that. When I came into a new position as a chief technology officer, and I told my IT staff, this is what drives me. This is why I get up every day in the morning. This is why I come to work. I'm looking to make schools the way that I wish they were when I was in high school, because I hated high school, and this is what it looked like to me. And what I found was about 90% of the IT people had the same exact experience. They didn't see school as relevant to them at all. And so just by sort of association, what ended up happening is everybody in my department were like, yeah, I'm on board with that, right? They were all just cogs working in the educational system as IT people. And when I put that out there and said, we're a bunch of renegades that are going to try to change the education system to make it more technology enabled and more relevant for students and get the real world into the classroom, they got fired up about that. And when we all got fired up about it, then it was like I could just say, hey, this is, the vision, right? If I'm not doing the things that look like that vision, I want to invite you to call me out and tell me I'm not doing it and how I could be better. I want to know about that stuff. And then when they would do that with me, because I'm not perfect and I would mess up, and I accepted that, and then came back and said, thank you for telling me that I'm going to do better next time, and then I do better, how inspiring was that to my team? Like, super inspiring. But it all starts with the vision. So if I were to create a triangle for leadership, it would be vision at the top, inspiration, accountability. And inspiration and accountability really emanates from the vision. So if there's one thing that you have to nail, is what is your vision that people can get on board with and get excited about?
Awesome. Yeah, I like that. Creating buy-in. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Yeah, okay. Couple things. I was wondering if you use personality profiles. If so, Strength Finder, what do you do? And then I also was curious of, could you go into some detail about why you left California?
Sure. Yeah, so the only personality profile as such that I use is Strength Finder 2.0. The reason for that is I've used a bunch of them. I've been a part of being on teams, leadership teams, where we all do it at the same time, and then we review that together and everything. And what I found is that most personality profile tools have a dark side to them in practice. And the dark side is that when there are negative things associated with certain aspects of personalities, people tend to get put in a box by the other people around them because of that. For instance, we would have like these weird behaviors that would happen in meetings among leadership after we did one of those things where somebody would behave badly in a meeting and do something, say something or do something they shouldn't do to somebody else. And then somebody else would make an excuse for that behavior and say, well, we expect that, he's a lion, right? Or he's this personality profile, let's give him grace on that. And I hate it. I hate that. Like, to me, like, all that does is put people in a box. You are that personality now, for better or for worse. And when you misbehave and it looks like your personality, somehow that's okay. I totally disagree with that, right? So I saw some of these weird things that would happen. I never experienced that with StrengthsFinder, because StrengthsFinder doesn't focus on weaknesses. It focuses on strengths only. And I love the research behind it. It really rang true to me, this idea where that if you study great leaders, what you find is they're all really different. So part of the reason it took me 8 years to get to the point where I felt like I was doing leadership really well was because I was grasping. I was reading everything I could get my hands on. And what I would find was I would read a leadership book from somebody who was clearly a great leader. And then I would take the stuff that they said that they did that was successful, and then I would try it in my environment and it wouldn't work. Or sometimes it would work, and then I would kind of integrate it. But most of the time it wouldn't work for me in my environment with my people, those three variables. And so what I recognize, what really the strengths-based leadership book sort of helped me recognize was that the common denominator between great leaders isn't that they all necessarily do the same things, but it's that they all understand their strengths and capitalize on their strengths. And then recognize the things they're not strong in, they want to get team members in who are strong in those areas and let them lead in those areas. And that was sort of the common denominator that I got out of the strengths-based leadership book. And that really, really sort of jived with me. And so I started using StrengthsFinder. And there's all kinds of great ways to use StrengthsFinder from an operational standpoint it's deeply embedded in my coaching curriculum that I've written. So I have all these suggestions for how you might use StrengthsFinder to help you hire people, the right people, to help you identify what people's goals and strengths and desires are, and then to help you do little things every day as a leader that nudge people in the direction of their strengths. And when I'm doing those kinds of things and nudging them every day into their areas of strength, they perform way better and they're way happier, and everything gets better. And one thing I recognized was, right, that I have things that I have to do or that I think I have to do as a leader, tasks that I absolutely hate, right? That they're just, I wouldn't wish them on my worst enemy, right? And so I take them on myself as some sort of, sacrificial lamb. I never wanted to give those, to delegate those things to somebody else. But what I've recognized is if I really understand my team's strengths well, I'll find that something I absolutely hate to do is one of the people on my team's favorite thing. And if I recognize what that is and match those two things up, my delegating that particular project to that person is the best thing I could have done for them, all week. They're excited to take on this thing that I hate to do, right? When they're working in their strengths, right? So yeah, I'm a huge fan of StrengthsFinder 2.0 assessment, and I use it in all kinds of different ways. And there was a second part of your question California. Okay, yeah. So I'll give you the short story. I was the chief communications officer of a school district that had 30 schools, 22,000 students in the Bay Area. We're about 40 miles northeast of San Francisco. And when the whole COVID thing went down. We closed down schools, like pretty much everybody did in the spring of 2020. And that was fine. You know, I was doing my thing. Actually, my job kind of changed a lot. It was really interesting because I was using a lot of the training that I had recently gotten, emergency operations and communications training that I had recently got from the state of California. So it was like, oh, cool. Now I can use all the stuff I just learned a couple of months ago. And so I was using all this communications training that I had gotten. We're doing all these things. It was really interesting. But when the summer rolled around, July 20, the state was not giving us any guidance as to whether or not students should be back in person for the new school year or not, or some sort of hybrid. They were just not giving us any guidance. And we were about a month away from school starting. And so we decided as a management team and as a board, school board, that we need to figure that out for ourselves if we're going to do a hybrid situation or have kids back fully or not at all. And so we all got together, and the expectation from the superintendent was that we all lay it out on the line, what we think, you know. And I'm a fairly politically conservative person, which, you know, when I look back on it, sometimes I think it's a miracle that I last 25 years in schools in California, but I did well. It was fine. But I was very strong on bringing kids back in person at that point. And it was public. You know, we were in public meetings when we were having these conversations. And so I laid it out there, and we ultimately decided to do hybrid, which I was happy with, because my concern was the students who had really bad home situations. And that we knew we had students who, if school was closed, they were not doing school from a computer at home. They were out on the street doing God knows what. And to me, we had enough data at that point to know that COVID was really not impacting most students, most younger people. So to me, it was a bigger risk to have all kids at home for a whole year. And so that was the argument that I made. We decided to go hybrid, which I was happy with, because then we gave the option to the students who needed to be at school to be there. So I was like, okay, that satisfies my concern. And then about a week and a half before school started, the state of California stepped in and said, everybody stays home in every school in the entire state. And then I became the chief communications officer, who everybody knew disagreed with that, but had to tell the story of why that was a good thing and why we were handling that well. And so my job, basically, I really just felt like my job made me a liar. And I went to the superintendent and said, I can't do this. If I was still the CTO, I probably could have been fine. But as the chief communications officer, it was a totally different thing. And I was out there trying to tell the story of why we were doing this and why this was a good thing. And I knew, and everybody else knew, that I didn't think it was a good thing. So ultimately, I went to the superintendent, told her I think I'm done. She got me a deal. They paid my contract out for the remaining 10 months on the contract. And we started looking at what we might do next. And when I looked around at the environment, I saw the same thing in every school district in California that I might go get another job at, and decided I think it's time to move out of California. And I didn't like a lot of the political things that were happening. The homelessness situation in our area had drastically changed in 5 years. We had problems with homeless people and hypodermic needles in our neighborhood, our very nice neighborhood, on people's front lawns. You couldn't have your kids playing out in front of your house, and it was terrible. And so we just decided it was time to move, and had nobody anywhere outside of California. Our whole family's from California. I've lived in California my entire life. So we looked at all the places I'd ever been on vacation. And Branson was one of the places we'd been on vacation, and ultimately this is where we ended up. And it's been a great move. That's the short version of the story, if you can believe that.
think your talk really resonated with me. I was going to ask you, as a young professional, I'm not in a position to leverage a lot of these skills just yet, but I'd love to be building them. What's a good outlook way of doing things to say yes, I'd like to be progressing towards this because, as I said, I resonated with it.
Thanks for that question. I really appreciate that you're looking in that direction. I think, reading leadership books, taking on, reading, listening to a lot of podcasts. There's a number of podcasts that I can recommend that are leadership focused. Patrick Lencioni has a great one. He's written a number of books that are just phenomenal as well. The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team come to mind. If you've never read that book, it's super, super great. John Maxwell is always a big one that he's a go-to guy that I love to go to. He's written 1 billion books, and they have podcasts as well that bring out regular content that's good. I also have a version of my coaching content that is basically self-paced. That's $300. So you can do it online, and it has a little bit of contact with me at that price. So a couple of meetings with me to talk about what your specific strengths are and what your goals are and that sort of thing. But so that's a fairly low price option to be able to kind of get more acquainted with the things that equal success in leadership, especially in an IT environment. Oh, and get a mentor. Go find, there are mentor platforms that you can engage in. What is the name? There's one called Together. That's a pretty good one, where you can get on, create a free account, and find other people across the country who are in technology leadership positions who are just offering 6-week mentorship, for free. 6-week mentorship relationships where you meet weekly and work on a particular problem or something that you're trying to grow in. So that's always a good thing too. And there's, get involved in Springfield Tech Council if you're not, because you can get connections with lots of people who can be mentors for you too.
You had mentioned in there that a lot of the people that you find that end up going into those leadership roles or that should be in those leadership roles tend to be kind of your mid-range folks. And they're doing a lot extra that may not necessarily be so obvious to managerial positions. What in that position, if you are there, would you do to be able to stand out more for someone that hasn't recognized that in the roles above you?
Well, I would say just the exact same thing that one young man did with me, which was be courageous enough to tell me his point of view on why he thought he was in that space. So, find ways, and really this is a big part of what my coaching curriculum does, is one of the challenges of moving from IT professional or technical professional to leadership is that most jobs in the IT professional ranks are very quantifiable. It's easy for you to, at the end of the day, look at what you did that day and go, did I have a good day or not? Did I do a good job? Right? You can, if you're a help desk technician, you can go, I closed 20 help desk tickets today. I had a good day. Right? It's easy to do that with server configuration. It's easy to do that with network configuration. It's easy to do that even with software development. If you know it well, right? How many lines of code? How many things did you put together? What type of work did you do today? It's more quantifiable than leadership work is. Leadership is hard to quantify. Leadership actions, good leadership actions. So what I attempt to do in my coaching curriculum is tie quantifying to leadership. So identify this is good leadership work. If you do this many times this week, you give yourself a pat on the back at the end of the day, right? But we're so I think accustomed, a lot of times IT people are accustomed to say, if I sat in meetings with people all day long, I got nothing done, right? But a lot of times in leadership, that's the job, right? So you have to find different ways to reward yourself. And I would say the same thing if you're looking to move into that position. Like, be realistic about how your bosses quantify your work and evaluate your work, and then try to recognize the places they don't evaluate you properly, and then expose that to them. So come to them and say, I've been keeping track of some of the things that your metrics don't keep track of, and I think they're helpful. Do you agree that they're helpful, or should I be just focusing on this? And what you may find is that they just didn't have a system to do that, or hadn't really thought that deeply about it. And when you bring it up, not only do you put yourself on a better footing for evaluation in the future, right? You instantly catapult your profile into a different level right there with them, because now you're making suggestions that could impact the entire department and make everything better. So being courageous enough, detailed enough to quantify your own work and really say, what does success equal, right? And in my job, and then be courageous enough to expose that to your bosses and say, these are the things that I think are important. Are they not important, or are they? Do you think they're important? And have that conversation, sort of negotiate with your bosses about your strengths. And that usually turns out actually really well.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, maybe time for one more question, and then we'll get out of here.
Really quick, Tim, what are those top 5 strengths of yours?
I should have known that was going to get asked. Okay, so the strengths there are 34 of them, right? And the 34 are then broken up into 4 groups, right? One of the groups is strategic. One of the groups is relational, building relationships. One of the groups is about sort of detail-oriented. Am I losing? Okay. And then one of them is sort of outward skills, right? Outward strengths that a lot of times are associated with sales type work, right? So there's these sort of 4 domains, and I like to think of them more often in the domains than I even do in the individual strengths. I use the individual strengths with people from the standpoint that the book has really, the strengths-based leadership book has really great advice on how to lead others who have a particular strength. And almost everybody that I know who's read the book just skips over that part. They don't think about it. But what I do is I take those sections and I take the 5 strengths that I find out that somebody has in my team, and then I put all of the suggestions. Usually there's 3 to 5 suggestions per strength for leading people who have that strength. So I'll take those 3 to 5 bullet points and I'll coalesce them with all the other 3 to 5s from the other 4 strengths that they have onto one document, and that's like my cheat sheet that I use with that person. And I look over that before I'm going to have a one-on-one with anybody. I'll look over that cheat sheet, and I'll pick at least 1 or 2 things that I'm going to focus on in that meeting. I know that's not what you asked, but I just wanted to kind of give that context. So I'm pretty typical. For an IT person, 2 of my strengths are in the strategic domain. 2 of my strengths are in the sort of excelling, detail-oriented domain, and then 1 of them is in the relationship building domain. And so strategic thinking, belief is my number 1. And you might kind of catch a bit of that in my talk, because that I think it's really connected with my answer about vision being the most important thing is because I'm very driven by the beliefs that I have. My leadership practice comes from a deep sense of spirituality, and I believe I'm called to take care of the people that I lead. That they're not my employees; they're people who've been placed in my care, and by a higher power, and by somebody else, and it's my responsibility to see that they get where they're meant to go. Like, I believe that strongly, and so belief is my number one strength. So, but strategic thinking, connector, and man, now I'm blanking on them. Belief, strategic thinking, connector. I don't think vision isn't one of the strengths, but it's something similar to that. Strategic thinking is kind of part of that. Gosh, I'm blanking on the other two. I'm sorry. Okay, I think I have it in my LinkedIn profile for reference. Yeah. So, but I don't memorize stuff that I can look up either. So, core philosophy.
All right, let's give Tim a great big round of applause. Thank you so much.